Good morning. I want to talk to you today about a father's faith. We're going to find this story in Matthew chapter 9, Mark chapter 5, and Luke chapter 8. And this is the story of Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue. And let's talk a little bit about that position. He would have been elected by the elders of his community, and his duty was to look after the order of divine service. This would have been a position similar to an administrative elder or an executive pastor. So he did relative little of the preaching, but he recruited those who did, and then he oversaw the affairs of the synagogue. These officials were usually very prominent in their communities, and it was one of the most respected offices. So no doubt his little girl was well known and loved by the people. Jesus has returned to the Galilean side of the sea, and this is the area where his popularity is growing, and it's grown constantly. And Jairus comes to Jesus while he's in Capernaum, and he begs him, he beseeches him to heal his daughter who lays at the point of death. And we're told that Jesus begins to follow Jairus home. But there's an interlude, and this huge crowd is following Jesus, and that slows his progress. And in the midst of that crowd is the woman with the issue of blood. And we've studied her recently, and you remember that she touched the hem of his garment because she knew if she could but touch his garment, she would be made well. He stops and says, "Who touched me?" And what did the disciples say? "In this crowd?" And she comes forward and tells him that she did, trembling, falling at his feet. And do you remember Jesus' response? He calls her daughter and says, "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Now I want us to think about that interlude from Jairus' point of view. I think it would have probably been a great test of his faith and patience. He knew it was necessary for Jesus to get to his daughter's bedside quickly. But he was happy for the lady that was healed because God met her need. But it was during that exchange between Jesus and the woman that the messengers from his household arrive, and they tell him, "Your daughter is dead." Can you imagine the gamut of emotions he feels? Maybe he had been fearful before getting the message. Maybe he was a little bit impatient, thinking, "Oh, Jesus, I need you to go with me." Maybe as Jesus interacted with this woman, his hope began to fade. Did I appeal to Jesus in vain? We don't know, but we know he was a man, and he had emotions and thoughts just like us. But then he gets that message that his daughter has died. Do you wonder if he thought, "Oh, Jesus, if he just hadn't stopped"? But Jesus knew Jairus was mourning. And you know what he said to Jairus? "Be not afraid, only believe." And Jesus then hastens with Jairus to his house, but he only allows Peter, James, and John to go with him. And what's going to happen, as we know, is this miracle will demonstrate his ability to deliver against all human expectations, perceived time constraints, really against all odds we could imagine. But when he gets there, what awaits Jesus? Commotion, mourning, weeping, loud wailing. You see, in biblical times, professional mourners were a required presence at death. Even the poorest of families were to hire 2 flute players and 1 wailing woman. The more wealthy hired more. These flute players were gathered to play the death rites. Their job as professional mourners was to grieve for the family, and the louder they were, the better. So often it was boisterous. But how does Jesus address them? Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The damsel, or the child, is not dead, but sleeping. And then how does the crowd respond? They laugh at him. So that tells us that this may have just been another job to them. Maybe they were just insincere mourners. Or maybe they were part of the people that felt disdain for Jesus. They knew she was dead. Maybe he didn't. Or if he did, maybe they assumed this great healer could not raise one from the dead. But what does Jesus do? He allows Peter, James, and John, the mother and the father, to go with him into the room where the little girl lay. He takes her by the hand and says, "Little girl, arise." And when he says that, she does. And not only does she arise, she starts walking around. So his authority backed up what he had told the people. Her state of death was temporary, so sleep was an accurate description of her temporary condition. But he also took care of the detail. And what did he tell them? Give her something to eat. And so, do we not have similar times when we don't understand, or we may have to wait? Let Jairus be an example to us, and lets us take our needs to the Lord and rest, knowing he is in control. I hope you have a great week.